So welcome to all of you. This is indeed a fascinating session. I'm looking forward to the insights, the learning, the wisdom that we will all share. And of course, mostly coming from Acharya ji. Let me take this opportunity to welcome Acharya Prashant, who is a powerful voice of socio-spiritual awakening in today's world. He's an acclaimed Vedanta exegete and author of over 80 books, including the national bestseller, Karma, Why Everything You Know About It Is Wrong. Fascinating title. An alumnus of IIT Delhi, IIM Ahmedabad, and a former civil services officer, he's an exponent of pure Vedantic wisdom, a vocal warrior against superstition and inner weakness, a promulgator of pure spiritual veganism, and an expounder of essential human freedom. It is my great pleasure to welcome Acharya ji and welcome all of you. Acharya ji, it is such an honor and a pleasure to have you with us. And if I might, if you don't mind, I might start off with the first question myself to you. And that question is, you know, we are doing some teaching and research now, which is on a center, maybe the first of its kind, not only in India, but around the world. It is called the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy. One of the big challenges that we, as anyone else who is interested in making a link between applied spirituality and public policy will face is that spirituality traditionally has been something at the individual level. Individuals seek wisdom, learning, awakening, call it enlightenment, and so on. Public policy, on the other hand, takes place at the societal level. It is in a collective. Society is engaged. You know, policymakers are engaged, politicians are engaged. So the question then is, how can we bridge the gap between spiritual awakening, spiritual wisdom, traditionally happening at individual level, with the collective problems of public policy?
Yes. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I'm really glad to be participating here. And see, we are talking about spirituality and public policy here and the peculiar challenge we face. The first thing that we see in spirituality is that there is hardly anything called the individual. So you said that it's the individual that seeks to learn, grow, and awaken, whereas public policy is at the collective and social level. There's hardly anything called the individual. We all are simply products of influences. The biologically conditioned organism is born, and then that organism gets further and further conditioned by what he experiences in the society. However, there is an innate displeasure, a state of malcontentment, because we are not merely mechanical or material. Therefore, being conditioned this way, doubly, biologically and socially, is not something we enjoy. So there is an inner strife. And that's the reason why all of us, most of us, are never quite at ease with ourselves and our surroundings and life in general. Because our fundamental nature is freedom, whereas our reality is that we are conditioned beings. So it's not really as if the person, the individual himself is a separate and powerful and entitled entity that would go on to seek learning, realization, and freedom. Since we are products of influences, hence public policy is of utmost importance. I'm trying to turn the argument over its head. If people are to be encouraged to seek the truth of their lives, live lives away from falseness and beliefs and superstitions, and spend their time in a liberated way, then the influences acting on them have to be very carefully exercised. Whether or not a person would have the urge towards awakening depends a lot on his environment. That's the reason why we have so many saints and seers and sages in India, and not that many, at least not densely packed, in other parts of the world. It's not for nothing that we talk of India as the spiritual capital of the world. It's got not much to do with the genes or something. It's got to do with the culture and the environment. And these are in the hands of policymakers and leaders and teachers. So we need to have, first of all, an education system, which comes very much in the purview of public policy, that encourages the student to go within himself. And that's got nothing to do with communal persuasions or particular ideologies or religious beliefs. It's something extremely universal. We are human beings, and there is the mind. And one must know from where two thoughts arise, feelings arise, identities arise. It's very similar, at least in the beginning, to the field of psychology. So there is nothing non-secular or partisan about it. Then if this thing goes well enough and it's taught nicely enough, then one comes to a point almost by himself where one realizes that the mind in itself is just a cage, and therefore one ought to be liberated. That need not even be very strongly taught. If just the fact of our being, our life, can be exposed to us, a mirror can be shown to us, then we will be in a better state to live as free-thinking individuals, broad-minded, less fearful, more tolerant. If we leave it just to the individual urge to gain freedom, then we'll have 1 in a million who will have that kind of a strong urge all by himself to rise against the inner shackles and try something extraordinary. And that is the need of the hour, therefore it cannot be left to chance. We cannot say that spiritual awakening is something that happens purely by grace, and there is no need for any kind of policy measures. Therefore, we need to have policy measures that encourage a certain inwardness. You have governments that, for example, encourage a certain kind of tourism just for pleasure, even in spiritual places. Obviously, you see, just an example to show that even taxation has a role here. We have governments that in the name of generating employment promote flesh consumption and atrocities over animals. It's not for nothing that as a society we are turning more and more insensitive, cruel, and you see the temperatures are already reaching 50 degrees centigrade. So unless the individual is awakened by means of right social environment and careful public policy, there would be very little chance. Right now, the condition is such that even if we have a kid or a young person who biologically and luckily has a certain inward orientation, the culture tears him away from the inner dimension and pushes him outwards. If you have an education that is focused totally on developing your marketable skills and earning your bread, how do you expect people to be self-aware? And if people are not self-aware, then there is no hope for humanity.
This is really a fascinating perspective, Acharya ji. Very interesting indeed. A quick follow-up, and then we let our other colleagues engage with you as well. We spent quite a bit of time, studying and engaging with and developing insights from Advaita Vedanta ourselves. In fact, we have done a background research on the mystical core of the world's religions. And we find similar teachings to Advaita Vedanta at the core of Christianity, the Sufism part of Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, and so on. So we look at this as a kind of a clear essential truth. Not only is that the case, when we look at the most recent research from quantum physics or cognitive neuroscience, the teachings are very similar, almost the same, the primacy of consciousness and so on. So I take your point that truly speaking, we are not individuals per se. We share a collective consciousness. But because of our conditioning, we believe we are separate individuals. So then we end up with a chicken and egg problem, because the policymakers tend to respond to the electorate, in democracies at least. On the other, so if the electorate as individuals are not demanding, the kind of public policies that are required for the enlightenment in a society, it's not likely we will get those policies. On the other hand, your argument is clear. If the public policies are not there, then it will not foster the environment in which people will become more enlightened. So we have a catch-22. How would you approach resolving this?
You see, that's one of the perils of a democratic system. The leaders cannot be much more conscious than their voters. We need now some kind of a magic which we cannot actually rely on. If it happens, it happens. It's a matter of grace. And we just said that the probability that someone would be awakened on his own, irrespective of the adverse social and cultural and educational environment, is 1 in a million. So the probability of that happening by itself is 1 in a million. The second thing that would happen if that does not happen is that there would be mass suffering. And that mass suffering would forcibly expose people to understanding that they are mistaken somewhere.
Mm.
The second route is obviously not preferable. But the first route is simply a function of prayers. We cannot do much about it. We will have to rely on certain extraordinary individuals to come up on their own. And then not merely beg the electorate for votes pandering to their insecurities and fears and ignorance, but actually enlighten the electorate and lead them towards something meaningful. The kind of leaders that we currently have, they move behind their followers because they cannot afford to annoy their followers, and the truth always carries the risk of irritating something or annoying something or somebody.
Mm.
I would rather say that those who understand the urgency of the situation have to do as much as possible.
Mm.
And the rest of the work will be done by the deteriorating global conditions. So 1 and 2 will work in tandem. On one hand, we need individual enterprise to assert itself and do whatever it can, so that at least a few examples are there, so that when one is in a position where he has to look to the other side of the fence, he does not see complete darkness. He at least has a few role models or ideals. So individuals must do whatever they can. But I'm afraid that a lot of work here is going to be done by mass suffering. We will see the results of our misguided ways. The chicken will come home to roost, and we'll be forced to change. And if we are not forced to change, then obliteration of this species is not a mammoth event in, let's say, cosmological terms. Species have arrived and departed, and that's been happening since millions of years. So if this particular species goes extinct, that's nothing special. It's for the sake of our own survival, continuation, and welfare that we ought to wake up. Either we do it on our own, or the grand cycle of Prakriti will simply run its course.
This is amazing. I was trained originally as an environmental scientist, and when you refer to the extinction of species, I myself made that observation about 30 years ago, that if we continue along this path, we're not going to change the world. We will just change the conditions under which humans are able to survive, and the species will go. And you have come to the same conclusion. This is quite amazing. I will now turn it over. I think one of my younger colleagues, Divya Patnagar, has something to ask. So Divya, go ahead.
Thank you, Acharya Prashant ji, for taking our questions. So my question pertains again to public policy. So we are all unique in our own ways, and we have unique aspirations and needs. So it's difficult to generalize and categorize us as a whole population into a few buckets of major characteristics. So public policy is a process of mutual collaboration between leaders in public. Both sides are important. Both sides inform each other and directs each other for the overall development. So considering this, how can each of us, every one of us, be inspired to develop our inner dimension and contribute to a better society, well-being, and economy, and therefore better public policy for our country? Thank you.
See, we are not unique. The uniquenesses, the differentiators are all mostly superficial. As you dig a little deeper, what you find is something very, very common. And the commonalities that you find are not very pretty. What guides us in this lifetime is just the will to somehow eat, live, sleep, procreate. That's the mother instinct. Vedant in Srimad Bhagavad Gita calls it as the 6 tendencies, the 6 enemies that rule us. So you have anger, you have fear, you have greed, you have lust, you have envy, you have and you have ignorance. So how exactly are we unique? One person is ignorant, the other 2 is ignorant. One is misled about his basic identity, just as the other one is. It's just that in one's drunken state, one decides, or what not, there is no decision involved actually. One tumbles towards the left, and the other one is rolling to the right. Now, would you say that these 2 opposite directions denote uniquenesses? No, they both have something much in common, which is that both are drunk and heavily drunk. That's the condition of mankind. We all are in a pail of ignorance. So, what ought to be the role of public policy here? Obviously, the first imperative is awakening. And we are not announcing a certain ideal here. We are not talking of the contents of the moral science class or syllabus of the human values course. We are talking of the most important thing in front of the individual as well as the planet today. The first imperative we are saying is awakening. Awakening to who we really are. If we do not realize that much of that which we call as our self, and therefore much of that which we call as our desires, are not our own at all, there is no hope. We are at a very peculiar point in the history of mankind. We are extremely close to devastation, rather total annihilation. We need to be shaken up. In fact, we need to be hit before we are bulldozed by the inevitable roll of time and the principle of results of action, karmphal. So that's the kind of public policy environment we need today. At every point, the individual needs to be reminded. All the stuff that pushes us deeper into our stupor needs to be checked. regulated, taxed. All the cultural elements and traditional values or social values or whatever that further reinforce our deluded identities must be stopped in their tracks before they do any further damage. That ought to be the role of public policy. You see, just as the general public, we are saying, is living in a haze of internal haze, so are the policymakers, because the policymakers come from the public. And hence the policy itself is very, very deluded because it does not know what to achieve. You can have very sharp minds who do the numbers. You can have very diligent and efficient people who carry out the execution. But you require a sage, a knower, a saint to set the vision. Is the vision there? Do we first of all realize what ought to be the very purpose of public policy? Because you see, when you say policy, there is something that you want to achieve. And if there is something that you want to achieve, you must first of all know where you stand. I must know where I am before I decide where to go. Do we know who we are, where we stand, what our condition is like? Do we really know that? No. The answer is a clear no. Not the man on the street and not the man in the parliament. Nobody really knows. Those who knew are very few and far between, and they have been further marginalized by the kind of flag religion has drawn in these times. We have, as the adage goes, thrown away the baby with the bathwater. Along with organized religion, we have discarded the most life-giving thing that we can have, core spirituality. It's core spirituality that should sit at the top and the bottom of all public policy. Public policy can't just be about better infrastructure or social amenities or this and that. I may have a great car. Of what use it is if I do not know where to go?
Thank you so much, Professor Acharya Prashant. Thank you.
Can't hear you.
Divya, please unmute yourself.
If it's okay, can I ask a follow-up question to this?
Of course, most welcome.
So the nudge theory says that there can be certain indicators that can be implemented in public policy that can, direct the behavior of the general public, of everyone. So can we have a nudge that directs us inwards, as you just said, and that can act as a policy tool? So this question comes from me and Professor Sandeep Patra.
See, unfortunately, we are all just too thick-skinned to be moved by mere nudges. I require the noise to go down. There. that noise. And switch both of them off. The nudges are all there, and they are there in everyday life itself. You see how we attempt to do one thing and end up doing something totally different. How we misread people and situations. How we get into something hoping for one kind of result, and the result we obtain is just something else. Does that not happen? That happens in our professional domains, that also happens in our personal domains. So those things are happening all the time. But we are very stubborn people, and the reason lies in our bodies. Bodily, we all are, I like to say, just emerging from the jungle. So our fundamental instincts are still very animalistic. Gentle nudges, subtle hints, polite pointers just do not work. They just don't work. When we step out of our houses, how many trees do we see? Not to a sensitive mind. This itself would be a very strong indicator, not merely a strong indicator, that person might actually be shaken up. Remember the story about the Shakyamuni Buddha. He was going to the youth festival, and all that he saw was a sick man, an old man, and a dead man. And these are everyday sights. Yet he was so sensitive that even these normal sights were enough to make him conclusively realize that there is something very, very wrong with the way we are living. And so he took an entirely different path. Now, do we take different paths? We get stuck in traffic jams every morning. Now, a person who intends to know what life is all about would have a complete revelation every morning. And the revelation is even half complete. You do not require too many mornings like that. We return, and then we switch on the TV, and you know the kind of crap that's thrown at us from there. Is that not sufficient to tell us our reality, who we are and where we come from, and therefore what we are headed towards? We have a very unfortunate tendency, or rather not even tendency, capacity to get adapted. Whatever be the conditions, the psyche with the ego at its center adapts to that. And once you adapt, you start calling the situations inside and outside as normal. You start thinking that this constant tension and unease within is normal, and you start thinking that all the atrocities you are witnessing outside of yourself, they too are normal. None of it is normal. All this is more than sufficient to communicate to us. It's all very loudly screaming at us that we are very much in the middle of a disaster. Yet we behave as if everything is normal. We attend weddings, we celebrate anniversaries, we participate in riots. We live as if all is hunky-dory. So I'm not a student of public policy, so please excuse me if I do not really appreciate what that theory is about. But going by the very little description you gave, this is what I got, and this is how I can respond. I do not know if I know that theory, but I think I reasonably well know the inner condition of mankind.
That was a very intriguing answer. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Next, we can go to Namesh. Namesh, if you are, can you please switch on your video so I can spotlight you?
Hello, Acharya ji. It's an honor to talk to you today, and thank you so much for giving your time to interact with us.
Most welcome.
As a researcher in public policy, I spend a lot of my time trying to understand why marginalized sections of our society. So when I say marginalized sections, I'm talking about slum dwellers, people, tribal populations, even a lot of rural section of our India. They are marginalized because in many ways, the government's policies or the programs that have been trying to implement for their progress, for their welfare, has not been able to achieve its desired results. Now, a lot of it can be attributed to the fact that, okay, they do not include the voices of the people themselves to understand what their needs are and so on. Now, what I am really curious to understand is, do you really think an understanding towards a spiritual perspective could actually help alleviate these gaps and maybe improve the policy-making process better, if that makes sense?
See, where do these inequities, dissimilarities, and exploitations come from? They are not mandated by the heavens.
Sure.
And there always have been inequities, and man has always been exploitative. The reason lies in our fundamental biological constitution. When you go to the jungle, how much compassion do you see? You do see some kind of cooperation there, right? And that too is for the sake of survival, food, and sex. Compassion is very hard to find in nature. Exploitation you can find very easily. Opportunism you will find at every step. Every organism is caring just for itself. It's just that in the jungle, the animals do not have sharp intellects. So they cannot carry on with their exploitativeness and opportunism for too long. Man is an animal at his core, but a very gifted animal, gifted intellect. The result is that mankind suffers from problems that no other species does. We not only exploit other species, we exploit members of our own as well. And we do that at every pretext possible. In the last 4 decades, we have lost more than 60% of our wildlife. Now, just let that sink in. 4 decades and 60% of wildlife is gone. Some of the most abundant animals on this planet are just the ones that we slaughter for meat. Only they have been allowed to proliferate, and they have not been allowed to proliferate. They are forcibly bred and cultivated. All others have been wiped out. Now that exploitative tendency we take to our own brothers and sisters as well. So there is the division between black and white, between man and woman, between rich and poor, between one caste and another caste, one religion and another religion, one nation and another nation, even one age and another age. The reason is not ideological. The reason is existential. This ought to be understood. Had the reason been ideological, one better ideology could have taken care of the situation. We could have replaced the old and rotten ideologies with something new, enlightened, fascinating, liberal, and that new ideology would have delivered the goods. No, the problem is that all ideologies come from the same conditioned and animalistic mind. Therefore, they can be only marginally better than the preceding ones. What we require is an understanding of our existential condition. Who are we? Who is the one who talks? Who is the one who says, I am and therefore I want? These are the two small things we never go into. I am and I want. Of these two, I am comes first. As long as I am, I will want just the selective welfare of who I am. If I do not know who I am, if I continue to be ignorant about who I am, I'll only want the selective welfare of who I think I am, but that which I really am not. So our desires are all products of our delusion. And therefore, our desires are also very violent. It's not just that the marginalized sections of the society are victims of oppression. Don't you see how kids are exploited within the family? Don't you see how the husband is violent towards the wife and the wife is violent towards the husband? Violence is ingrained in our DNA. And unless our consciousness is liberated of our DNA, there is no hope. Do you see what I'm saying? We need a consciousness that is liberated, that is free of the bodily compulsions. Otherwise, we will just do what we are currently doing, and that too at an increased speed. And that is happening all around us. Don't you see that? Not only is destruction happening, destruction is happening at an accelerated pace. So, and when we see that there is misery, there is suffering, that there are certain people who have been victimized, then we sink deeper into our delusion. We start blaming others, a particular section, as the root cause of the problem. We do not realize that the root cause is within us. And unless you have an environment, you have an education system, you have social stimuli that take people away from their animalistic tendencies, the same thing will continue to happen. One animal wants to grab the territory of another animal, especially if the former is a bigger animal. One big country wants to grab the territory of a smaller country. But this we take as something a bit sophisticated. We discuss this in the United Nations. We talk of this as something at least half serious and half intellectual. We sit in our formal clothes and discuss the occupation of territory on high fora. But when one dog encroaches into the territory of another dog, we look at it as something very ordinary, very lowly indeed. We do not see that the same thing is happening. And unless we come to that sharp, quick, conclusive realization, we'll keep giving respect to all the wrong things, and we'll sink deeper into misery, and we'll not realize why we are suffering in the first place.
Can I ask a follow-up question if that's fine with you?
Sure.
So for someone, let's say, who is poor and who is oppressed, he or she would know that, and are aware of the fact that, well, they are poor and they do not have access to the resources that they would need for their upliftment, right? And at the same time, they might not even have the access to, like, say, education, or like even understanding what they could do in, like, for them to come out of the traps that they are in. Under such a situation, do you think there is a solution that can actually help in any kind of upliftment at all? Or do you say that we are actually, like, moving, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is just widening further and further?
The question is, what do the haves have?
Yeah.
Do they really have something worth coveting?
Hmm.
Indeed, people need something, but what is it that we all do need? Right? No point running the same race. The have something, the haves have something, and if all the have-nots aspire to have the same thing that the haves have, then all we'll have is disaster.
Mm.
Think of what will happen if the entire population of India is able to have the same per capita consumption as the population of US. Will we survive? Will the earth last even 6 months? Is consumption, first of all, the goal of human life? And when I say consumption, that includes education as well, because our education is very much consumption centric. So you talked of the solution. The superficial solution obviously is to bridge the gap. And that you could do by various means. You could do that by subsidies. You could do that by affirmative action. You could do that by social schemes, by reservations. There is so much that you can do. And if you do that, there would be some positive impact, and you are entitled to feel good about it. But so far and no more. That takes you no further than this. If you really want wholesome change, then you need a social system, an education system to begin with. That will be the first thing. That encourages the right values. And the moment I use the word values, it starts sounding cliched, even trite, because the word values has been abused so much and slighted so much. It has lost its meaning. It has become insignificant. Maybe we need another word to suit our minds. We need to understand what is it that is, first of all, valuable in life. And that is what each human being must have. Each kid that is born is entitled to have something in life. The question is, what is that something? Disneyland? A trip to Mars? Ivy League MBA? Wonderful kind of clothing? What? What is it that we ought to have? Obviously, there are the basic physical needs. We require good food, we require shelter. But being a human being, there is something more that we need, something that animals do not need, but we do. And that's the central thing that I dare say is even more important than food and shelter. I'm not discounting the importance of food and shelter. So figure that out and ensure that everybody gets to have that. Otherwise, you can give a car to every single person in the population of India and feel that you have created an equitable society. You can give the right to vote to every single person and then see the kind of leaders they elect.
That makes sense. No, thank you so much, Acharya ji, for your response.
Next, we can have Sumalata. Sumalata, if you can switch on your video.
Hello, good evening, sir. My question is like, I want to know, like, see, one of the essence of spirituality is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That is, the world is one family. But the press.
I couldn't hear properly. Sorry.
Can you? Now can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
So one of the essence of spirituality is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world as a one family. But the present trends that we are seeing happening and the countries are evolving into unilateralism and self-interest, as you say, power absorption, and phenomena like racism, terrorism, and intolerance. These things are perpetuated by technology. So this is posing a big challenge in attaining this one world concept. So my question is that, what do you think is a way forward of attaining a spirituality as a global consciousness phenomena?
No.
How can we?
Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is not the basic premise of spirituality. That is not. It's just that it's a popular kind of catchphrase. It is not the fundamental thing. Again, global consciousness is another phrase in circulation these days, but that again is not something deeply spiritual. The first thing that spirituality brings to you is not that the entire world is a family, but that the entire world is false. Not that the entire world is family, but that the entire world is false. Not family, but false. There's a big difference there. Now, when you say the world, it is actually your world you are talking of. The sages take great pains to help us understand this. There is nothing called the objective world. We all live in our personal universes. And it is these personal universes that are false. And because we live in our personal worlds, therefore no two worlds are ever properly at sync with each other, in sync with each other. And hence there is a lot of strife. I live in my mental globe, you live in yours. And my globe is never going to concur with yours. Why? Because I have a personal center and you too have a personal center. And the personal center is false and cares just about its own false and imaginary welfare. So it's not that the entire world is a family. That's a very pedestrian kind of concept and phrase we have picked up because it suits us. If you go to Vedant, if you go to Upanishads, the kind of declarations you find there are far deeper, far richer, far more striking, but we don't pick them up. We don't pick them up because they don't suit us. First of all, we don't understand them. All right. And if ever accidentally we do get to understand, we find them scary. We find them scary because they reveal to us the falseness of our concepts, our very life itself. So we don't touch them. We pick up something very, very easy and comfortable, like Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, right? The oneness of the globe will remain a mere pipe dream as long as the more fundamental spiritual question is not answered. The fundamental question is, who am I? And as you go into it, you discover that most of that which you consider as yourself is a mere phantom. Our past speaks from within us, borrowed concepts, our mouth spouts, environmental influences get absorbed within and then start speaking as I. And when you see that, then you say, how can I insist on my desires, on my concepts, on my beliefs, my opinions, my thoughts? How can I insist on any of these? And that's when the Vedantic process of neti neti begins. You start dropping. You say, it's not worth it. It's not worth it carrying the false into the future. What's the point energetically plunging into something when I do not know who I am and what that thing is? So there comes a pause. And with that pause, there is clarity. And then in that clarity, there is renewed, fresh, and life-giving action. So, you see, are we happy even with the little personal families that we have? What happens in our families? What happens in our houses? Let's get real. If we are not happy in a family of 5, why do we want to extend the same unhappiness to the entire globe by talking of stuff like Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam? The man and the woman are all the time at each other's throat, breaking each other's head. You cannot have peace even in your kutumb of 2. Why do you want to have a global kutumb? But it sounds so nice. And then from high platforms and very respectable fora, such things are uttered. And they are totally meaningless, mean nothing at all. Why? Because we have never had the time to really go into spirituality. And as was said by our respectable friend in the opening address, Advaita Vedant is at the core of all religious streams. We have never had the time to study Vedant. So the little exposure to spirituality that we have is by way of popular culture. Somebody taught us some verse from Saint Kabir. Somebody came to us and, we accidentally heard something from the Ramcharitmanas. Upanishads, obviously they are in Sanskrit, so we not even accidentally got to hear them. So, and that's where we stand, you see. In the name of spirituality, all we do is pay lip service. You go to university functions. Before they start doing what they want to, they have something called the Saraswati Vandana and lamp lighting and such stuff. And whenever I am on such a stage, let me put it clearly, I cringe. Do we even know what we are doing? But we use Sanskrit and cultural motifs to just lend respectability to whatever we are doing, without understanding even 1% of what Vedanta is about. I request that let's please initiate a course on Vedanta. Let's have a compilation of the richest, the juiciest verses, and at least some students will benefit. At least the faculty members will benefit. So, yeah.
Okay.
I have much to say. It's just that I'm blocked by the context and the paucity of time.
Yes, sir, I understand. But I also have one thing, without we feeling oneness, how can we gonna face the global challenges that we are facing today, like climate change or
But
pandemic?
you do not know the one you are. How will you feel oneness with the one that the other is?
So spirituality, what is the scope of spirituality in this case?
First of all, know the one you are. Oneness with the other is a far-fetched thing. I do not know who I am. How will I find my brother? Tell me, please. You want to have universal brotherhood. You do not know your own name. How will you identify your brother?
So it means like each individual has to search for themselves, then we have to find a global solution.
Obviously, the moment you search for yourself, you find all that which keeps you divided and distinct from the other. You not only find that, but you also find that it is false. And with that discovery, oneness is established on its own. You do not have to search or strive for it. Oneness is not an accomplishment in the outer direction. Oneness is a discovery within. You have to look into yourself. You cannot remaining deluded and torn within. You cannot go to your neighbor's house and hug him and say, now the two of us are one. That will be meaningless, no?
So yes. In that case, like the pandemic has forced us to go in the economic slump as it has created. In that case, many of the people, at least in India, we can see that poverty has made them to address the basic needs, the daily needs. In that case, where is the scope for them to go and search for themselves inside when they are so pulled by the economic pressures outside? So, in that case, like how can we look forward?
That's again not something entirely true. Please understand. Some of the greatest saints we have had came from very impoverished backgrounds. So it's not as if the person is poor, he cannot have an internal dimension. In fact, I face it daily these days, that it is probably equally difficult to turn inwards when you are affluent. Why? Because now there is so much at stake. When you go inwards, what you discover is that all this that you have collected is not of much use. Rather, it has been quite a lot about your life and time and effort gone waste. And accepting that is a big blow to the ego. So you don't want to accept that because now you've raised your stakes. When you don't have much, then it's easy to discard what you have. Don't you see that, please? If you do not have much, isn't it rather easy for you to discard what you have? What if you have spent 70 years accumulating all the trivia from the world and considering yourself very rich? And then at the age of 70, you suddenly come to know that life has just been wasted in this kind of accumulation. You won't want to accept that. That's the reason, whether you are talking of Saint Dadu Dayal, Saint Garib Das, obviously the greatly venerated Saint Kabir and Saint Raidas, do you think they came from rich backgrounds? In fact, the truth is opposite. Those who came from rich backgrounds actually gave up what they had to go to the jungle. We are talking of Siddharth Gautam and Vardhaman Mahavir here. So it's not that first of all you need to be full and then you can pursue spirituality. Please remember, man is never going to be full. And if you keep waiting for that day, you will keep waiting. So start from where you are. If you keep saying when the conditions are ripe, then I'll venture inwards. Rest assured, the conditions will never be ripe. And the last day will come.
Kanika, you can go ahead and ask.
And I'm Acharya. So the discussion has been really, increasingly fulfilling for me because I have been getting answers to a lot of my questions. So there is a follow-up question to the previous discussions, and then I would ask my question if it is okay.
Sure.
So we were talking about that there should be a course on Vedant. And we were also talking about, do we even know what are the implications of this haves and have-nots? And what is exactly this have that one should have? And why do we desire the have that we have? So the very first thing that we learn in economics is more is better. And we build the entire economic theory around it. More is better, more is better. And so you get more and more contentment as you get more and more. And it's in the material dimension. So thinking of that and then the course on Vedant and then putting it all together, how can we begin inculcating some of these things in the teaching pedagogy? Let's say in economics discipline, when the first thing that we have to teach is that more is better. How can we, make students more conscious about the heavy implication of this statement?
More is better for whom? Who is the one wanting more and more to get better? Not everything is better when more, right? For example, food, even a basic thing like food. And almost everything in the world has its particular use in a particular quantity. It all depends on the one who is consuming it, experiencing it, intaking it. So when you talk of economics and you say economics is the science of welfare, you have to stop right there and ask yourself, whose welfare? And what does that welfare comprise of? Do we take consumption as a necessary and short indicator of welfare? Can we have some research into that, please? As human beings, what is it that constitutes our welfare? The more you'll go into this question, the very face of economics will change. Probably it's all coming from a point and a time when things were in scarcity. Therefore, it appeared commonsensical to say that the more stuff that you have, the happier you would be. Is that the condition today? Actually, it was never the condition. But sometimes, in some ages, in some situations, it may feel that way. Today, the time is ripe to see the fallacy of that feeling. Basic arithmetic lets us know that the welfare of the human being lies no more in consumption, because the human being, on an average, is wealthier today than any other time in history. We do talk of malnourishment and deep poverty and such things, and we quote large numbers. But remember that compared to the population of the planet, that number is smaller today than it ever was. As a proportion of the world's population, fewer people are dying of hunger today than ever were. In fact, the number of people dying of overconsumption, things like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and all other lifestyle-related disorders, is far bigger than the number of people who are dying of hunger and malnutrition. Bigger by a factor of, I suppose, 5, 10, 20. You'd probably know better. You deal with numbers. So where does human welfare lie today? In reducing hunger or reducing obesity? Please tell me. Please. And it's a very pedestrian question. The thing that we are discussing is far deeper. But still, this is a fair enough pointer. There was a time when we were dying of insecurity because we were not very protected, very well protected against stuff. Today, we are dying because of excessive security, are we not? Think of the kind of buildings that we have raised to secure ourselves. Think of the kind of infrastructure we have raised to secure ourselves. And think of the kind of armies, militaries we have raised to defend ourselves. And is that not what is killing us and the planet? So is it not time to revise the definition of welfare? Can we survive the kind of definitions we have today and the consumptions we have today? All the time we are parroting per capita income, GDP, GNP. Is that taking us anywhere except towards destruction? Growth rate. Even this has seeped so deeply into the cultural vocabulary that even politicians are using this language to attack each other, because they know that even the man on the street understands this. So they say, oh, the GDP is now only 5%. And in the UPA times, it used to be 8%. Now nobody knows 5% of what and 8% of what. But even the man on the street is impressed by this argument. Oh, so GDP is only 5%. And then it was 8%. As if 3 or 3,000 rupees have been taken away from his own pocket. 8 minus 5. Some 3, something has been lost. What do you know? Do we understand anything? But it has become some kind of essential. If you do not have it, then you have lost it. Politicians say, oh, we are fighting this election, and development is the topmost on our manifesto. Now, what do you mean by development? Please explain. What do you mean by development? One of the reasons why the heat wave is so severe is because of development. Will we ever count the casualties of development? Let me tell you a simple thing. No shade is left in our big cities because all the trees have been massacred in the name of development. Development is such a vague word, is it not? Development, vikas. What exactly are you talking of? Come on, let's specify. What do you mean by development? What do you mean by growth? And how do you account for all the people who are dying because they can't find even a single tree to rest under? And can you imagine what has happened to the birds and the insects when there are no trees? Do we spare even a thought to them? But we don't want to talk about it. We say development, development, and GDP. And everybody feels happy. GDP. Yes, please. Interrupt me at an opportune time. Otherwise, I'll just keep rolling.
No, so I am actually getting more and more uncomfortable as I go more and more into some spiritual teachings, is because I feel that my subject, economics, has to either change itself or somebody from outside has to change it, or it has to be the change maker, because everything seems to stand in opposition to what seems to now be the right way to live. So the responsibility, I guess, is upon us, even more than other disciplines.
Definitely.
Yes. So there's another question, Acharya, which is different from this thing. This is something because this is specific. You also talk about, children and childbearing decisions and everything. And so again, this is something that, nations, they also have a stand on population sizes and fertility rates in their countries. And most of these stands, they depend on the prevailing economic conditions of the times.
I missed your last sentence. Can you repeat?
The stand that the nations take about what the ideal fertility rate should be in their country is usually based on the prevailing economic conditions. So if they think there is excessive, pressure on the resources, like for instance, China in the 1980s, they advocate a one-child policy and maybe even come out with a law like China. And then now many countries face the problem of aging, and they need more people who are in the working age group. So now they're advocating larger family sizes, and they're basically providing subsidies and soaps for people to have more children. So I just wanted to know what, if there was a spiritual approach towards childbearing decisions, what it would be like on a national level or on a public policy level.
Can we go to the fundamentals, please? What is a country and why does it need people? Why do you need people? And what did China do by restricting the number of people who would be born? What did China do? Today, one of the biggest threats to global security is Chinese ambition and Chinese development, is it not? Let's face it. So, what are nations trying to do when they talk of the number of people, the number of citizens that they have? They are weaponizing their populations, are they not? They are looking at their populations as their resources. Now, whose resources? When you say a country needs to have more people. Now, people, I understand, people are the units of consciousness. A person has consciousness. Now, what is this thing called the country? When you say China needs to have more people, who is China? Who exactly is China? Or who exactly is Japan or Germany? What will they do with people? I'm telling you what they'll do with people. They'll weaponize those people so that they can assert their hegemony over others. And who is this person who will assert his hegemony? It is the collective devil within us that gets manifested in the shape of a party president, if it's an autocratic system, or in the shape of a prime minister or president, if it is a democratic system. Otherwise, what do you mean by having more people or less people? That's how you count your grenades. That's how you count your guns, don't you? So we do not exist to be weaponized by somebody. My existence is not for a number that somebody can quote to hegemonize somebody else. Some president says, oh, we are getting fewer in number and we are getting very aged, so let's have more kids. Do you want kids to be born this way because the party president ordered them to be born? Because the party president was afraid that if you do not have enough kids, then other countries will invade and control? You are fundamentally your consciousness. You are fundamentally not your country. A country is something you create. A consciousness is what you are. I'm not sure I'm able to communicate what I want to say. But this entire approach is born out of a deep ignorance towards the self. We do not know who we are. Therefore, we think of ourselves as units produced in a certain factory. You have that factory that's producing so many units, and there is so much in its inventory, and it has captured so much market share. Countries are competing as if they are corporations. And who's going to win? Nobody. It's just that life is going to be defeated, and we do not realize that. The ego is so insecure. It seeks to validate itself and assert itself in every form possible. The kind of empty patriotism that we see is just one instance of the assertion of hollowness of the ego.
Yeah, never thought about it this way.
Now think of this situation. You'll be able to relate to this better. A girl gets married, and she goes into an affluent household. It's an affluent household, really. And then there is the patriarch, the grandfather. And the grandfather says, oh, I had only one son. I had only one son, and you are his wife. And I have so many assets. I have great properties in so many countries, at so many places, and there are so many factories and so many other things. And we do not have enough people to take care of them. And I want the control to be exercised by my own blood, because that's what the ego says. So, woman, give me 5 sons. Now, how does the girl feel about it? That exactly is what is happening when countries decide that they should have more or less population. Now, Germany is saying, I'm getting old, and who will take care of all my assets? Therefore, we need to have a greater fertility rate. So all the young men and women, you go and have sex and beget us kids. What kind of discourse is this? And don't you see the humiliation contained in this? It's humiliating and also hilarious. It could be a joke. Instead, it is national policy.
And they make it sound serious. And it's
That's
very
the
subtly put.
That's the entire problem. Very, very foolish things are spoken in a way that makes them appear serious, because they are being uttered from the parliaments, from the presidential palaces, from very high platforms, and very grave looking men and women are saying those things, and everybody in audience seems to be respectable, and everybody is silently nodding as if something important, something worthy is being said. What is being said is not even worth being a joke. Think of that old patriarch again.
Mhm.
And the girl has just entered the family, and he calls her in and says, I want 5 sons to take care of my lands and my gold and my legacy. Well, if you do not have enough people, so be it. That's all. One of the richest persons on this planet is again and again touting something called population collapse. Now, this has to be a function of utterly low IQ. What do you mean by population collapse? Collapse with respect to what? With respect to the current baseline, which is 8 billion. So you mean to say that if it reduces from 8 billion to 7 or 6 billion, it is a collapse? Who told you in the first place that 8 billion deserves to be called a standard baseline? But nobody will ask these basic questions. We think of ourselves as intelligent. We think we are somebodies. And therefore, it is astonishing, rather shocking, when we encounter the fact of our utter foolishness. The fact is, be it the man on the street or the man in the parliament, we all are foolish to the core. And the reason is our bodies. The bodies can have certain intellect, but the bodies are not designed to have wisdom. And you can be very much an intelligent fool if you do not have wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, Patra, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I was listening to all the points very carefully. And I think that they kind of correlates with all the activities and thinking that we are doing at our center very deeply. For example, the last points which came out on kind of really, we are all.
Okay, Patra, sorry to interrupt you. I think there is some technical issue at the side. So let's wait for the video to come back on. Okay, you can proceed now.
Yeah. I think that last point was marvelous, that we need to understand that we are full to the core. And that is, when we start fresh and we start exploring. Otherwise, this ego will just kill us. That is what is happening. So we are also trying very hard at our center that whether we can, deliberate and reflect on all these points. And one point that we are trying to do is basically come up with a kind of a PhD course. It may be other level also, but one kind of a PhD course where we try to bring in this kind of thinking to our students, that we need to kind of bring in different disciplines, that both natural science, social science, humanities, but also try to deeply reflect that what is missing in the current status of knowledge and so on. So I would really like to know for you, or get some suggestions from you based on that how we can kind of design such a course and relate that to our students. Because, as you have brilliantly mentioned, that until unless we change our education, nothing is going to change. I mean, until unless the education is like kind of soul searching, or, search of kind of core spirituality that we have said, which doesn't relate to any kind of religious bigotry and so on. So how would you suggest us to kind of design such a course and relate to our students on that?
No, I'll be very glad to be a part of such an exercise. So if I know the objective and the contours within which we are operating, I'll be glad to give my suggestions.
Okay, so I think we have prepared a kind of outline for that course, and we would be very glad to share with you also to get your suggestions on the kind of specific points that how we can relate to our students. That is one point. And the second thing that I must say, that your reflections on core spirituality aspect was really something which left us thinking very much. Because, as you also mentioned about this very stupid application of Maslow's hierarchy, that, once you reach that pinnacle, you get all these worldly desires fulfilled, then you are going to become spiritual. Nothing can be far away from the truth. And I think that this is also a very important lesson for all of us. And we need to kind of reach out with this to people. Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Singh, I'll request you to take the discussion forward now that we have gone to all panelists.
Right. So this has been a phenomenal journey. Thank you so much, Acharya Ji, for reinforcing so many of the points that I struggle with as I communicate and teach my students. So many of these questions that have been put to you, and you have answered them so much in depth and absolutely on point, that I'm really, really pleased that we were able to engage in this way today. So one or two other things that are left for us to talk about, if we may. One of them is, this issue of religion versus spirituality. It's a big issue. But I want to put it as a policy challenge. There are two big things in my mind that I'd really like. But before we run out of time, I'd also like for us, if it is possible at all, to have a follow-up one-on-one conversation in the context of our teaching and research. We will benefit tremendously from your deep insights. So that's one thing on the side. So if your colleagues who, work with you can help us with that, I appreciate that. But the question here is, the way I put it is India today too religious to be spiritual?
Well,
you know what I'm getting at?
Yes,
The
yes.
divisions along
fact,
religious lines,
You have put it
compared to the lofty spirituality that India's history has.
right. right. In fact, you have put it quite succinctly. You can definitely say India is just too religious to be spiritual. And that's also my everyday experience. People who come from overtly religious backgrounds, it is more difficult to teach them. It is more difficult even for them to listen without prejudice and interference, internal interference. Whereas people who come from very normal, irreligious backgrounds, even atheists, they are far more receptive, and their listening is less corrupted, less filtered. It's a travesty, because religion is supposed to be the entire ecosystem that turns one spiritual. But that's the way of Maya, as Vedant puts it. You build something to tackle her, and instead she will co-opt that same very thing, ingest it, and turn it into her own weapon. Saint Kabir puts it very beautifully. He says, you accord sacredness to the water of the river, and Maya will make that water her own. You accord sacredness to the deity in the temple, and Maya will make that deity her own. You accord sacredness to the holy verses, and Maya will make those verses her own. So that's the thing with frozen methods. And organized religion is nothing but a name of frozen methods, traditions, rituals. They were designed to be helpful, no doubt. But over time, they have all not only lost their efficacy, but have actually become active instruments in the hand of Maya. So, the situation has become so bad that the core spiritual documents like the Upanishads, people have turned to reviling them, actually putting them aside and denigrating them, so that they can continue with the rituals and beliefs that they call as religion. So, for example, if people are indulging in something utterly stupid, and I ask them that this that you are doing, is this written in Gita? They will say, oh, the Gita is not all that important. We have other books as well. And even if it is not written in Gita, it's a ritual we follow, and our rituals, that's what's implicit in what they're saying. Our rituals are more important than Gita. No, that's utterly shocking. I ask them, yours is, when I'm talking to Hindus, let's say, yours is a Vedic religion. And this that you are doing, is it sanctioned by the core of Vedas, which is Vedant? Does Vedant sanction what you are doing? They will say, no, we don't care about Vedant. We haven't even read what the Upanishads say. But this is what my fathers and forefathers were doing. And that is what is more important. This is what we call as religion. So this kind of cultural nationalism is emerging. Not only nationalism, cultural jingoism of all kinds, of which one manifestation is nationalism. And religion has become another name for the popular low-level culture. So whatever we do in the name of religion, whatever we culturally do in the name of religion, that is religion. And that is the popular consensus. Spirituality, well, that is something we are not interested in. So you're very right when you say that today religion and spirituality are at odds with each other. And that's the most important battle that needs to be fought today. of bringing out the primacy of spirituality over religion. Otherwise, one very disastrous thing that is happening is that people, especially the young people, the intellectual people, they conflate religion and spirituality. And because they do not like what they see in the name of religion, they go away from spirituality as well. Because they do not like all the rioting and hooliganism in the name of let's say, the Hindu religion, they totally discard the Upanishads as well. Because they do not like the caste system that's prevalent in the Hindu fold, they would discard the Bhagavad Gita as well. My question is, are the Upanishads or Bhagavad Gita or Brahma Sutra or Ashtavakra Gita, are they talking of the caste system? In fact, they are actively saying in so many words that caste system is bogus. You have an entire Upanishad dedicated to discarding the caste system. And yet there are big sections who are discarding spirituality because spirituality appears to be affiliated with religion. Hence, this distinction needs to be very clearly made. That the religion that these people are practicing is not religion. In fact, they have sabotaged the word religion. And this word needs to be liberated from their fold. Otherwise, there needs to be a new stream. And that's what the Buddha had to do. Because the priestly class of that time had totally monopolized religion. Therefore, he had to come up with a new stream of his own, which was nothing but essentially the spiritual core of the existing religion itself.
That's right.
But he had to give it another name because the existing religion had been totally monopolized. Maybe that is the need of the hour. Either refinement from within or an outgrowth outside. I would prefer an inner refinement.
This is indeed, I think, like you put it, the need of the hour. When I started this center at the O.P. Jindal Global University, this was the vision and the challenge. It's both a vision and a challenge. I looked at the lofty wisdom, the spirituality that India had. And I look at India today and I see the divide. And I ask myself, one, we have to find a way, and I hope if we can join forces with other like-minded people and organizations, we can hopefully make some progress. But a bigger, more positive question that comes to my mind is, can India lead a new renaissance in the world, building on its lofty philosophy, essentially Advaita Vedanta, and lead us to a new way of doing economics, a new way of politics, a new way of public policy, to a world that will be the world so many of us hope for. And if not us at this generation, our children hope for. A world with more equity, sustainability, prosperity, less conflict, and so on. That world. My hope is that the answer to that question might be yes, but I might be completely wrong. I'd like your thoughts.
You see, India is just too big. And therefore, I'm afraid when we say, can India lead a revolution? It becomes a bit hazy. Because India will contain just so many diverse, even opposing elements and streams at all times. We are talking of 1.4 billion people. Maybe there would be awakenings within India, forces from within, streams from within that can show the way to the entire world. But as a patriot, if I imagine a situation where the entire Indian political country has awakened, I find it difficult. Still, we can have powerful movements of awakening starting from within India. And I hope that first of all, they get success within India. But what I realistically see is that even if such a movement starts from within India, it has a greater chance of succeeding abroad. Because as you said, India is just too religious. I really share your hope, but realistically, I do not see the first successes coming from within India. So as far as the initiation of such a movement or such an awakening is concerned, chances are very high that something can happen from within our nation. Chances are very high. But what I also see is that more success in terms of its expansion and acceptance will come from abroad. And what would rather happen is that once there is success abroad, then Indians will probably queue up to follow. So my heart really wants to agree with you, and that's the reason I have continued to work in this country. I could have taken the decision to shift my base to other places where conditions are much more supportive. And I too want things to happen here in the first place. But because I have been trying since over a decade now, so I know how difficult it is to deal with a mindset that's frozen in time, that has become a hotbed of all kinds of confused notions. And not that abroad it is going to be much better, but at least the Renaissance destroyed some of the most stupid beliefs there. India never had a Renaissance of that kind. So even the worst kinds of beliefs continue to prosper in the mind here. And fighting those beliefs is not only tiring, also feels humiliating. You know, you feel all right and you feel encouraged when you fight a worthy enemy. How do you feel while fighting a belief that says that there are 7 ghosts that live on this particular tree, and if you do not please them, then your kid will die? Now, this unfortunately is not a joke. This unfortunately is a very solid belief that, let's say, millions in this country share. And if you want to question this belief, not even attack it, then there is great resistance. So the first successes will probably not come from within, but I really, really want that this nation that has given core spirituality to the entire world does not remain or end up deprived of its own fruit. Diya tale andhera. I don't want that to happen, but it's an uphill task. It's an uphill task. Let's see.
So Acharya ji, I think that has brought us close to the time at which we must wrap up. Let me just check with Dr. Chatterjee if there was anything else.
Dr. Patra has a follow-up question. I think if
in
a few minutes we can take a follow-up, and then I'll come back to you for the closing remarks.
Okay.
Yeah, Thank you. Actually, just a follow-up kind of a point. If I want to know about how Acharya ji would reflect on that. You know, when you are saying that a lot of changes might come from abroad rather than within, that's one kind of observation. Now, one way to think about it would also be to connect genuinely core spirituality with science. Not in the spooky way, you know, what we find, you know, that entanglement of human minds and all those kind of rubbish things, but really understanding that how science and genuine philosophical thinking that went on in our country, they can be integrated. And we at our center, we had hosted some very important scientists earlier, like Donald Hoffman and also Minas Kafatos and so on. And myself working with some scientists in various papers and books, we have seen amazing synergies between, not only Advaita is already there, but Buddhism and Jainism and modern scientific thinking. So maybe that this concept that these spiritual philosophies can enrich science in a genuine way, not in a kind of spooky way, that might also help to kind of encourage that kind of a movement. That is like my own passion and thinking, what you can say. So I'd just like to hear from you on that.
It's a very worthy desire you have expressed, sir. Again, because I care for it so much, so I'll venture to play the devil's advocate again. What is happening is that in the absence of self-knowledge, science too can become just another profession of the ego, which means that one could be a great scientist and yet inwardly very ignorant. So, whereas it is obviously important that one has a scientific attitude, and verses in the Upanishads are very unambiguous about it. They say you cannot have self-knowledge without having worldly knowledge. So worldly knowledge is referred to as a vidya, inner knowledge, knowledge of the self is referred to as vidya. And the Upanishads categorically say that if you think that you can have inner knowledge sans outer knowledge, then you will fall into a deep well. So you need to have both, and only then you cross over the bondages of this life. So science is definitely of great importance, but is the scientist above things like comparison, like jealousy, like greed, like ambition? If the scientist too is ambitious and partisan and a deluded fellow, then merely the knowledge of science is not going to help. In fact, that's the reason why I often say that if superstition is going to be obliterated, it's not science but spirituality that would do it. Superstitions will be taken care of not so much by science, but by spirituality. In the absence of spirituality, science itself becomes a new modern kind of superstition. Because you see, science is all about the external world. This is how this moves, this is how that works. What is my relationship with what works and what moves? That science has nothing to do with. And that's a big problem. You may know everything about what this wall is about and all the elementary particles inside it, and you may know the quarks and string theory and everything. But do you know what your relationship with all this is? Do you know who the experiencer of all this is? Do you know who is the one who is experiencing and storing this knowledge? And therefore, do you know who is the one who is going to use this knowledge? If you do not have self-knowledge, then external knowledge may not be of much help. It becomes a throw of dice. You do not know what will happen. The safest thing that may happen is that it may not be of much use. The worst thing that may happen is that it may be put, such external knowledge may be put to very, very devastating uses. like the kind of uses we have put nuclear energy to. So I'm sure I've not given a clear answer. Science obviously is very important. I keep stressing that one cannot be ignorant of science and hope to be self-aware. But I also want to assert that science without spirituality is very, very problematic. And just because one is a scientist, one does not become wise.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. This is exactly one of the core issues that we are thinking in our center. That is very much close to your heart.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Excellent. Thanks, Sudhir. So it only remains now, and let me first apologize to anyone who might have wanted to ask a question, but because of time, we couldn't have that question posed. I just want to say in closing, Acharya ji, that when I think of your having been trained at IIT and IIM, and having been in the public service, you know, you bring science and engineering and management and public service experience together with your in-depth knowledge and self-realization of the lofty philosophy of Advaita. We could not have wanted anyone more erudite than yourself to engage with us this evening. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time. I know your time must be in great demand. I want to acknowledge the fact that you took the time to engage with us. And we want to, in closing, like my colleague Sudipatra mentioned, we have a few concrete ideas where we believe we can benefit tremendously from an ongoing partnership and relationship with your foundation and yourself. We hope you will agree to that, even in the midst of the great pressures on your time. And we would follow up with Dr. Chatterjee and others to make the link and seek your guidance and inputs, because we share the same goal here. It's exactly what you are setting out to do, that we are setting out to do, and our comparative advantage is within a university system. And we are going to be very happy to put that advantage at your disposal. There are also, of course, as a university, many disadvantages. And we hope to overcome that with the kind of partnership that we can have with your foundation. So today, this is the beginning at this point, I hope, and not the end. It's just the end of these 2 hours we have been so fortunate to have with you. So let me thank you again and thank all your colleagues who helped to organize this. And let me acknowledge as well all my colleagues, both within our own school, but within other schools that might have been present, as well as others. And we look forward to an ongoing collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I thoroughly enjoyed the whole conversation, and I'll thank you and all the participants. And I really do look forward to an association, even a collaboration going ahead. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye now. Bye to all.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for patiently listening and participating in the session. Now we'll move on to the second part of today's discussion, and that is a session on the Chandogya Upanishad. We'll be starting that session shortly. Participants from Jindal Global University are also encouraged to stay. Okay, so I just got information that due to lack of time, we will not be having the Upanishad session today. We will reschedule it to a later date. Thank you everyone for attending the session.